How did Mengele escape after the war?
Um, he, when he left Auschwitz in January of 1945, he packed all of his notes and specimens and other things into a vehicle and went to Berlin, where he received his next assignment, which was to be the garrison physician for the area around Breslau, and to be the chief physician at the Gross-Rosen concentration camp. By the time he got to Gross-Rosen, it was just on the brink of being liberated by the Soviets, and he then transferred to a subcamp of Gross-Rosen. And finally, by the beginning of May 1945, he was on foot, headed back to Germany in retreat, and because the Soviets were headed his way, and he knew as well as others that the war was over. On his way, he encountered a Wehrmacht field hospital, which, as luck would have it for him, one of the officers there was a former colleague of his at the Frankfurt Institute, and he asked whether he could join up with this field hospital. And they said yes. He got rid of his SS uniform and donned a Wehrmacht officer's uniform. And he and this field hospital ended up for about 6 weeks, beginning in early May 1945 to mid-June 1945, in an area that was unoccupied. The Soviets had halted their advance, and the Americans, in this case, had halted their advance, and they left an area in a forest that was unoccupied by either of the Allies. It was there in this forest encampment that Mengele was able to establish his a very cogent cover story and establish his identity as a Wehrmacht officer, not an SS officer. At some point, it was decided wisely by this field hospital that they would surrender to the Americans rather than the Soviets, which was clearly a good choice for them. And they got in their vehicles and they drove toward the west, and they ended up near Hof in Bavaria, and they surrendered to the Americans and were placed in two different prisoner of war camps. First one, and then that closed down, and they moved to another one. Mengele was likely released under his own name, although that's not certain, in mid-August of 1945. This happened for two reasons, or at least two reasons explain how this could have happened. One, Mengele did not have the blood type tattoo that almost all SS, Waffen-SS officers or personnel had. This was a tattoo under their left arm, which indicated their blood type in case they were wounded and unconscious on the battlefield. They could receive the appropriate blood type for transfusion. Mengele, who had been a medical officer for his unit, refused to get the tattoo, or just didn't give himself the tattoo. He was responsible for typing the blood and giving the tattoo, so that he was able to pass these simple but normally effective litmus tests that the Allies, the Americans, applied to German prisoners. Take off your shirt, raise your arms. If they saw the blood type tattoo, they would then be moved aside and evaluated more carefully through intense interrogation. Also, although Mengele's name appears on an early wanted list, even before the end of the war, we found in our investigation that these wanted lists had not been effectively distributed and hadn't reached the POW facility where Mengele had been interned. So he was able to be released, probably under his own name. And from there, he went to, well, I've answered your question. You might, yeah.
If you could continue. He then to South America.
Yeah, he decided not to go home, not to go to his home in Bavaria, and instead took on a false name because he was concerned about his safety, and worked on a farm as a manual laborer for about 3 years. Very difficult work. He made contact with his family, His brother came to visit him. His wife and infant son came to visit him on several different occasions. And at some point, he decided that it was nearly impossible for him to have a life in Germany anymore, and decided that he had to leave. And with the help of his wealthy family and the money that they had, he was able to make his way from Germany through Austria, over the Brenner Pass into Italy, and finally to Genoa, where he boarded a ship for Buenos Aires in the summer of the late spring of 1949. His wife decided not to go with him, so he left his wife and toddler son behind.